Elk Magic. After many years of hard work, I have managed to create a reputation for myself of not catching fish and not shooting game. I don't mean to brag, but I have been in situations where a 12-year-old boy with a slingshot could have limited out, and I have still managed to come away empty-handed. My psychologist friend Paul Quinnett, a few years ago, wrote an article in which he testified as an expert witness to my rare ability not only to catch no fish, but to prevent anyone within a radius of 100 yards from catching fish. Indeed, such is my reputation around town that people here won't even think about going fishing or hunting on a day when they know I'm abroad with a rod or gun anywhere in the state. It's a special talent. Some of the best guides and outfitters in the country have bragged that they were so good there was no way I could come back from an excursion with them without bagging fish or game. I have accepted numerous of these challenges and have yet to be defeated. Sadly, I heard later that many of these guides and outfitters afterwards took to drink. Others lost all faith in their skills and wound up among the homeless, stumbling along the streets of large cities and mumbling absurdities like, "I know the elk were there, but McManus, he did something, radiated out some kind of magnetic field," or One outfitter even sold his pack string, went to law school, and became a successful attorney. How would you like that on your conscience? I must admit that I'd become pretty smug about never catching fish or shooting game. Sure, I was even a bit cocky, maybe even too cocky. That day I was sitting in a hotel lounge in Denver when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up into the smiling face of Paul Howard, the former offensive lineman for the Denver Broncos. Paul now owned Proline Excursions out of Denver. We chatted for a while, and then Paul said, "I've got a proposition for you, Pat. You come hunt with me, and I'll guarantee you an elk." I laughed and shook my head. "No way, Paul. You're too nice a guy. I've ruined too many outfitters who thought they could go up against my reputation, and I've beaten them all. You hunt with me, you could end up as an attorney." Paul shuddered at the thought, and a tiny doubt flickered in his eyes for a split second. That is one of the things you watch for when an outfitter tries to call you out. It gives you an edge, and sometimes that's all you need. "I know your reputation," Paul said, "and I know the risks. But I've got a place where even you cannot help but get an elk. We had 100% success rate on our last hunt. Most of these guys had never even seen an elk before, let alone shot one." I had heard it all before. Hunters kept awake all night by elk bugling around their camp. Traffic on the roads held up for hours by streams of elk passing through. Hunters who wouldn't pull the trigger on bulls with racks the size of forklifts because they thought they were dreaming, and so on. Paul's challenge was mighty tempting, though. These days I was about as popular with outfitters as sushi at a cattleman's barbecue. It had been years since I added another notch to my rifle stock, which was already pretty well eaten away from notches, recording the other outfitters I had defeated. From the way Paul described his ranch, I knew this would be a major challenge, and a major notch. I only hoped there was enough wood left in the stock to take it. "Okay, Paul," I said, "you're on. I'll meet you at the crack of dawn 1 year from today." "Great. One question." "Sure." "What time does dawn crack around here?" Paul told me. "In that case, we'll meet 2 hours after the crack of dawn." As the year passed, I became increasingly uneasy about my hunt with Paul Howard. He was and still is a great athlete. Maybe he would expect me to keep up with him as he charged up and down the mountains of Colorado, which start where other mountains end and go up from there, way up. In order to survive such a hunt, I would have to spend the next 6 months running 5 miles a day, lifting weights, dieting. I called up Paul and told him a life-and-death situation had come up and I wouldn't be able to hunt with him after all. "I can drive you right up to the hunting area," Paul said, "and you just sit there until an elk you like comes by." "Really? Hold on a second, Paul. My secretary just handed me a note. Hey, this is wonderful. The life-and-death situation has just been canceled." What a coincidence. Little did Paul realize I hadn't been handed a note at all. I don't even have a secretary. These outfitters are so easy to fool. I should mention here that the stakes in these challenges are high for me, too. I make my living by writing about being unsuccessful in outdoor sports. If I go on an outing and have a good time, it's ruined for me. If everything goes wrong, I'm delighted. Once, my friends Gary Rodel and Keith Jackson and I were stranded by a stalled pickup truck at the bottom of a remote canyon in Montana in the middle of a blizzard. The situation was desperate. Rodel and Jackson looked grim. I burst out laughing. "Bad enough we're all going to freeze to death," Jackson said, "but we have to put up with a crazy person while we do it." Unsuccess is my meat and potatoes. If I were a successful and expert hunter, I could be Jim Zumbo, and Jim Zumbo could be me. As a matter of fact, I have suggested several times that we exchange identities. Zumbo always says, "Let me think about it." No. But now, Paul Howard had presented me with a formidable challenge. If he managed to put an elk within the range of my marksmanship, which is close, he would win, whether or not I shot the elk. That's the way the game is played. I had plenty to lose. A whole career of unsuccess could be wiped out in a single moment by one stupid elk. The day of the elk hunt finally arrived. Kathy Howard, Paul's wife, picked me up at the airport. Kathy is a funny and very classy person, but she didn't ease my concern about the hunt. "I'm so sick of elk," she confessed. "Elk, elk, elk, elk. That's all anyone talks about up at the ranch. Who got the biggest rack? Who made the best shot? Every hunter who shows up thinks his elk is the greatest." "Every hunter?" I said. "Every hunter has got an elk? So far this year, it's all just so boring. Well, we have a new group in now. Maybe they'll be able to talk about something besides elk." "I doubt it," I said. I know elk hunters. As we approached the ranch, Kathy suddenly braked. "What is it?" I asked. "Elk," she said. And it was true. A herd of elk bounded down the bank just ahead of us and streamed across the road. I couldn't believe it, and I don't expect anyone else to, but it happened. I was immediately overcome with a terrible sense of foreboding. "Elk, elk, elk," Kathy said. "I can't even drive to town without practically getting run over by elk." "It's terrible," I said. I meant it, too. We had a magnificent feed at the Winslet Ranch that night. The Howards, ranch owners Alan and Jean Jones, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But all the other newly arrived hunters were so joyous with expectation they could barely eat. They'd come from all parts of the United States, seeking that fabled hunt of a lifetime. A pleasant chap by the name of Russ came all the way from Long Island. This was his first elk hunt. He was so beside himself with excitement that I didn't know which of him to talk to. That night, I bunked in a cozy and picturesque log cabin that had once been the ranch's one-room schoolhouse. I was thoroughly comfortable, but I had trouble getting to sleep, what with all the elk bugling outside. The ranch definitely needed a curfew, with all the elk to be shut off at 10 p.m. Forgetting what I had told him a year earlier, Paul woke us up well before the crack of dawn, herded us into the ranch house, and stuffed us with a gargantuan breakfast. Afterwards, he loaded Russ and me into a 4x4 pickup truck, and we clawed our way farther up into the mountains. Some of the grades were mere precipices, but there were steep places, too. On several occasions, both Russ and I were beside ourselves with excitement, which made for a pretty crowded pickup cab. Finally, reaching a plateau of sorts, Paul parked the truck and we got out, softly closing the doors so as not to disturb the elk. I was jittery. It looked as though in a few moments I would have to shoot an elk. Paul placed Russ and me on stands. Shortly thereafter, a sliver of sun appeared on the horizon. It was the first time I had ever seen the sun rise from below me. Colorado mountains are high. "Get ready," Paul whispered to me. "Some elk should be coming by any minute now. And remember, don't take the first big bull you see. Wait for a nice one." "Right," I said. Sweat trickled down my back. I stared at the freshly churned-up ground where a herd of elk had recently passed not more than 25 yards in front of me. It would be an easy shot. I hate easy shots. They don't allow you any excuse for missing. The sun rose higher in the sky. "They should be here by now," Paul said. He looked around, a puzzled expression on his face. "They've been moving through here every morning. I scouted it out just for you." My old confidence began to return. I smiled. "They're probably bedded in those aspens down there," Paul said nervously. "I'll make a sweep around the bottom of the ridge and drive them up past you and Russ. Remember, pick out a good one." "Sure," I said. Paul headed for the grove of aspens. Off in the distance I could see Russ on his stand, rifle at the ready, his posture tense with expectation. I removed my hunting jacket and sat down on it. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee. I thought about taking a nap. I recognized the situation. The outfitter turning panicky. The outfitter rushing off to drive elk toward me. I laughed, without fear of being heard by elk. An hour later, Paul came puffing up the steep slope. "See anything?" "Nothing." I don't know what's wrong," Paul said, wiping his face with a kerchief. "This place is always crawling with elk." "Well, if they aren't here, I know where they'll be." We piled into the pickup and drove to another place. The elk weren't there either. Paul was dumbfounded. He had never before come up against my kind of magic. Driving out in the dark that night, we passed a deep, heavily forested canyon. We could hear the elk down there, bugling like mad. "So that's where they went to," Paul said. That's really odd. I've never known elk to hole up in that particular canyon before. Well, at least we know where they are. We'll get 'em tomorrow." I stifled a laugh. I knew what the elk were doing down in that canyon. They were making travel plans. The leader of the herd was drawing maps in the dirt with a hoof. "Okay, gang," he was saying, "we had a close call today because we didn't know Pat was coming on the hunt. Fortunately, we were able to hide out in this canyon we've never hidden out in before. Now's our chance to clear out. Now, here we have Hawaii, and here we have the Northwest Territories. Now, Hawaii is a long swim, so we'd better head for the Northwest Territories. We owe it to Pat. Mount up, Yo! The next morning the elk were gone from the canyon. That evening, reports began to come in from other hunters who hadn't seen an elk for dozens of miles in any direction. Paul's other hunters stared grimly at him over supper that night. Russ was so disappointed he could hardly talk. I liked Russ a lot, and Paul, too, and I knew what I had to do. I took Paul aside. "I'm pulling out of here first thing in the morning," I told him. "I just can't do this to all these good folks. Going soft, I guess." "Gee, I really appreciate that, Pat," Paul said. "I thought I could beat you, but I see now that's not possible." "You're the best I've ever seen." "Thanks," I said. "I'll be out of the state by tomorrow night. The elk can't be more than a day's trek away. They'll come flooding back in as soon as I'm gone." As it happened, the elk didn't even wait until I was out of the state. As Kathy was driving me off the ranch on my way back to Denver, she slammed on the brakes. A herd of elk streamed across the road ahead of us. "Elk! Elk! Elk!" she yelled in exasperation. I heard later that Russ got a 7-point bull that very day. I guess he must have taken the first one that came along, but beginning elk hunters tend to do that. As Kathy and I sat in the car waiting for the elk to pass, I unsheathed my rifle. "What are you doing with your rifle?" Kathy asked. "You can't shoot from the road." "I'm just carving a notch in the stock," I said. "A big notch." "But you didn't get an elk." I guess Kathy hadn't heard about my reputation.